TIFU by accidentally sending my boss a very NSFW audio message meant for my girlfriend. So, I, 29 work in a mid-sized marketing firm where communication is almost entirely done over Slack. Emails are mostly for external clients, but for internal stuff, project updates, quick messages, casual chit-chat, it's Slack all the way. This is important to the story. I'm currently in a long-distance relationship with my girlfriend, who recently moved 3 states away for grad school. We've been trying all kinds of creative ways to keep things spicy. One thing we've started doing is sending each other audio messages, sometimes sweet, sometimes very, very not sweet. Now, to set the scene for the actual disaster, it was a Wednesday morning. I was already frazzled because I'd slept through my alarm, spilled coffee on my only clean dress shirt, and then got stuck behind a garbage truck on the way to work. By the time I got to the office, I was 25 minutes late, and my boss, Monica, 45F, was already looking for me to get a status update on a pitch we were preparing for a big client. In my rush, I fired up Slack, dropped into our team channel, and started catching up on messages. Then I noticed a voice note from my girlfriend come through on WhatsApp. I figured I'd multitask, so I grabbed my headphones and listened to it. It was, let's say, suggestive. She was whispering in that voice she uses when she wants me to drop everything and fly over that night. Now, like an idiot, I decided I'd record something back immediately because her message got me flustered, in a good way, and I didn't want to lose that momentum. So I unplugged my headphones, huge mistake, opened the WhatsApp voice recorder, and whispered back something equally filthy. And I mean filthy. I described, in vivid detail, what I'd do to her if she were there. It was a full 90 seconds of X-rated dialogue, and I was into it. Here's where the actual screw-up happened. Somehow, when I went to send the voice note, my muscle memory, trained by months of Slack use, kicked in. I had also just been looking at my Slack DMs, specifically a message Monica had sent me asking for the updated slide deck. Without thinking, I recorded the message in WhatsApp, but instead of hitting send there, I accidentally dragged and dropped the audio file from my desktop into Slack. Right into my direct message thread with Monica. It sent instantly. No warning, no are you sure, just boom, there it was. I stared at the screen for a second in confusion. Then realization hit me like a freight train. You know that feeling when your heart drops into your stomach and your vision narrows to a tunnel? That's where I was. I immediately clicked the little 3 dots to delete the message, but Slack had just updated its policy, no deletions unless you're an admin. Guess who's not an admin? For a moment, I hoped maybe she was in a meeting or away from her desk. Maybe I could explain before she listened. I jumped up from my chair, practically knocking over my coffee again, and started making my way to her office. Halfway there, I see her coming down the hallway. She's holding her phone, looking at the screen with this confused, and slightly horrified, expression. I froze like a deer in headlights. She stops right in front of me and says, "Is this, for me?" My mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. I couldn't lie. I was too panicked. No, that was supposed to go to my girlfriend. I'm so sorry. Please don't listen to it. She blinked slowly. I already did. Cue internal screaming. She didn't say anything else, just walked past me into her office and closed the door. I stood there for a good 30 seconds, stunned. Then I slunk back to my desk, where my teammates were already giving me weird looks because apparently I had groaned audibly when I realized what I did. The next couple of hours were torture. I couldn't concentrate, couldn't eat, couldn't even look at Slack. Every time I saw Monica's name, I wanted to curl up and disappear. Finally, she pinged me. "Please come to my office." I walked in ready to be fired, or at the very least, written up. She gestured for me to sit down. Monica is a professional woman. Serious, sharp, and no-nonsense. But even she had to stifle a chuckle as she said, "So, that was certainly the most detailed project description I've ever received." I stammered out another apology, explaining how it was a total mistake, that I was mortified that it wouldn't happen again. She let me finish, then nodded slowly. Look, I get it. We're all human. But you've got to be more careful. This could have gone very differently if it had been in a group channel or sent to a client. I nodded furiously, agreeing with everything she said. She then told me to take the rest of the day off and sort myself out. I practically ran out of the building. To her credit, she never brought it up again. The next day was business as usual. But now, anytime someone on the team says, "Hey, can you drop a voice note in Slack?" I get flashbacks and break into a cold sweat. Also, my girlfriend thinks the whole thing is hilarious. She now ends every message with "double check before you send," winky face. Moral of the story: never mix sexting and work. And for the love of God, don't trust muscle memory when dragging files across apps. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps the content grow and motivates me to create even more great videos. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. By the way, I'm curious, when do you usually watch my videos? While working, studying, or just relaxing at home? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for your support. TIFU by trying to impress my girlfriend's dad with my handyman skills. This happened last weekend and I'm still recovering from the physical and emotional bruises. So, my girlfriend, let's call her Emma, and I have been dating for about a year now. Things are going great. She's funny, smart, beautiful, and for some unknown reason, she thinks I'm a catch. Her dad, however, is another story. He's ex-military, owns every tool known to man, and once fixed a leaking water heater with a pocket knife and duct tape. I don't even know if that's physically possible, but that's the story. The guy is basically Ron Swanson with more glowering and less mustache. Emma warned me before our visit to her parents' house, don't try to impress him. Just be normal. Which of course, I interpreted as, this is your one shot to prove you're worthy of his daughter. Fast forward to Saturday morning. We arrive at her parents' place in the countryside. Her dad, let's call him Jim, greets me with a nod so sharp it could have sliced bread. During small talk over breakfast, he mentions he's been meaning to replace a broken garden fence post but hasn't had the time. This, dear readers, is when my inner idiot made his grand entrance. I say, "Oh, I could fix that for you. I've done a ton of stuff like that before." This was a bold-faced lie. The closest I've come to carpentry is assembling an IKEA coffee table with a missing Allen key. Jim raises an eyebrow but doesn't say no. All right. Tools are in the shed. I head outside, trying to look like I know what I'm doing. Emma gives me a look that says, "Why are you like this?" I brush it off and go full Bob the Builder. The fence post is definitely rotten and needs to be replaced. I find a new post, a post hole digger, and a sledgehammer in the shed. Somehow, the idea of asking for instructions seems like a bigger failure than completely destroying the yard. So I wing it. Digging the old post out takes me 45 minutes and 3 blisters. I'm sweating profusely. My shirt is covered in dirt and shame. Finally, I plant the new post, pour in some dry concrete mix I found, and fill it up with water from a nearby hose. Seems legit, right? Then comes the hammering part. I want it really secure, so I start wailing on the top of the post with the sledgehammer. Turns out, you're not supposed to do that. Wood splinters, the post starts to crack, and one particularly powerful swing ricochets off the cracked wood and lands directly on my foot. I collapse, yelling something unmanly like mother of pearls, while writhing in the grass. Emma and her dad come running. Jim takes one look at the shattered post, the bag of concrete that I forgot to mix before pouring, and my crumpled body. "You hit it with the sledgehammer?" he asks. Yeah." He sighs like a disappointed blacksmith and walks back inside without another word. Emma helps me up, barely holding in her laughter. It gets worse. I hobble inside, and Jim, perhaps out of pity, offers me a beer and an ice pack. I sit on their perfectly white couch and, without realizing it, place the ice pack directly on my sock, which is soaked in blood from my toenail that decided to partially evacuate during the sledgehammer incident. A few minutes later, Emma's mom screams from the living room. I look over and see a lovely red Rorschach test blooming on the couch cushion. Jim closes his eyes like he's trying to astrally project himself out of the situation. I panic and jump up to help clean it, forgetting the ice pack, which slips and somehow launches itself like a hockey puck across the hardwood floor. Their golden retriever thinks this is the best thing that's ever happened and bolts after it, crashing into a side table and shattering a family photo in the process. I try to catch the dog, trip over the coffee table, and faceplant into the rug, which I now know smells faintly of lavender and pure humiliation. Jim doesn't say anything. He just slowly takes out his phone and starts Googling something. I'm pretty sure it was how to file a restraining order against daughter's boyfriend. Emma helps me up again, and I limp to the guest room to change. I take off my ruined sock and notice that my toe looks like a deflated plum. I try to clean it in the bathroom, but I'm a little lightheaded from the pain, and probably the beer, so I sit down on the closed toilet lid to rest. Here's the thing, their toilet has one of those sensor bidet attachments. I have never used a bidet before. When I sit down, I accidentally brush against the remote on the sink counter. There's a beep, a whir, and then suddenly a jet of water launches itself directly at the back of my pants. I shriek, jump up, and knock the remote into the sink. The bidet doesn't stop. It goes full fire hose mode, spraying the bathroom wall like Jackson Pollock had a plumbing fetish. I try to turn it off, but instead hit a button labeled enema mode. I don't know what this is supposed to do, but the water pressure somehow increases. I finally manage to yank the power plug from the wall. The silence is deafening. The bathroom looks like SeaWorld. Jim knocks on the door. You okay in there? I open it slowly. Wet pants. Bloodied foot. Bidet water still dripping from my shirt collar. He takes one look and says, "You done trying to impress me?" I nod. Yeah. I'm very done. He actually laughs. For the first time ever. Good. You're a terrible handyman. But at least you're persistent. We spent the rest of the afternoon redoing the fence properly. He showed me how to mix concrete, how to set a post, and how not to use a sledgehammer like a medieval barbarian. I think we bonded. Or trauma bonded. Either way, we shook hands at the end of the day. He even offered me another beer. I drank it standing up. Far away from anything breakable. So yeah. I destroyed a fence, bled on a couch, caused a dog-induced catastrophe, and triggered a bidet apocalypse, all in the name of impressing my girlfriend's dad. Moral of the story? Don't lie about your skills. Especially not to a man who once diffused a lawnmower accident with a paperclip and a stare. TIFU. By convincing my entire office I had a twin brother for 4 years. Let me start by saying I didn't set out to deceive anyone. It started as a joke, one of those harmless little office pranks that spirals out of control until you're standing in the break room giving your fake twin brother's wedding invite to your boss, and everyone is asking if you'll be doing the speech. It all started 4 years ago when I joined a mid-sized marketing firm right out of college. I was the new guy, quiet, introverted, eager not to ruffle any feathers. During one of my first lunches, I mentioned in passing that I had a twin brother. I don't know why I said it. Maybe I was nervous and trying to make conversation. Maybe I just wanted to seem more interesting than the guy who still had milk crates for furniture. Either way, I said it. His name, I told them, was Mason. We weren't identical, just close enough that people sometimes mistook us for each other. I even threw in that classic twin thing, we always know when the other is in pain. Haha. That should have been the end of it. But then, a few weeks later, someone in the office, I think it was Claire from accounting, saw me at a bar downtown. Or rather, she saw Mason. I wasn't at the bar. I was at home eating leftover pad thai and re-watching The Office. But Claire was adamant. She waved at me, him, and I looked right at her and walked away. The next morning, she confronted me in the kitchen about ignoring her. That's when I realized the truth. She had seen someone who kind of looked like me, and she assumed it was me. My dumb brain saw a golden opportunity and said, "Oh, that must have been Mason." Boom. Mason was real now. I even apologized for him being weird with strangers. People laughed. I laughed. It was harmless. But then Mason started showing up everywhere. Turns out, the city's not that big when people have face blindness for your doppelganger. I got reports from coworkers seeing me in places I'd never been, spin class, poetry readings, even a farmer's market at 7 a.m. Every time, I'd just say, "Oh, that was probably Mason." People started getting curious. They asked if he lived nearby. I said yes. They asked if he was single. I said no, we made up a girlfriend named Elise. Mason became a running office joke. He was the cooler, more outgoing version of me. Mason danced. Mason rock climbed. Mason could cook. I created this alter ego who had all the confidence I didn't, and somehow, everyone liked him more than they liked me. Then, the lies deepened. I was out sick for a week with the flu, and when I came back, I jokingly said, Mason almost had to come in and cover for me. That turned into a whole thing. My coworkers begged me to have Mason stop by. They wanted to meet him. I kept dodging, said he was shy, he worked nights, he didn't like corporate environments. But the more I resisted, the more they insisted. And that's when I made the biggest mistake of all. I became Mason. Not permanently. Just for one day. It was Halloween, and people were encouraged to dress up. I decided it would be hilarious to come in as Mason. I wore contacts instead of glasses, messed up my hair, shaved my beard down to stubble, wore completely different clothes. Walked in with confidence, a smug grin, and coffee for everyone. I told them I was Mason, and they bought it. I made up a fake deep voice, joked around with people, flirted with the receptionist, the whole 9 yards. They loved Mason. That day should have been the end of it. I should have said it was a gag. But everyone was so thrilled to finally meet him, and I didn't want to disappoint them. So I told them Mason had to leave town. Elise got a job overseas. They were moving to Denmark. That worked. For a while. Fast forward 3 years. I've been at the company for a while now. I got promoted. I have real friends there. People bring up Mason less and less. But the legend never really died. His picture, from Halloween, is still on the office wall. Best costume, Mason, the twin. I tried to get it taken down, but everyone's too fond of it. Then, this February, our HR manager, Dana, sends out an invite to the whole office, let's throw a going-away party for Nick's brother. Mason and Elise are finally tying the knot before moving back to the States. I panicked. Apparently, someone, Claire, again, had seen a guy who looked like Mason downtown, assumed it was him, asked about his life, and he mentioned he was getting married soon. This wasn't me. This was apparently my citywide evil twin doppelganger, running amok. And now my coworkers were planning a party. I didn't know what to do. I thought about quitting. I thought about faking my death. I thought about pretending Mason died tragically in a bungee jumping accident. But no, instead, I doubled down. I said Mason and Elise were having a small private ceremony but would stop by the office for drinks after. I scheduled the party for a Friday afternoon. At 4 p.m. On that Friday, I left work at noon, went home, transformed again, hair, stubble, voice, everything, and came back as Mason. Everyone cheered. There were cupcakes. A banner. A handmade card with all their signatures. I made up stories about my travels. I made a toast. I hugged people. I even gave Dana a thank you gift. And then I made my exit. I walked out the door, got in my car, drove around the block, and came back 30 minutes later as myself. Sorry I missed Mason. Traffic was hell. People told me how amazing he was. How lucky I was to have a brother like him. I nodded, smiled, and died inside. But then, the final blow. A month later, our company got acquired. New owners, new management. Big transition. The new CEO wanted to do human stories to help team bonding. He wanted everyone to share something personal during the Monday all-hands Zoom meeting. Claire, bless her, volunteered me. Nick has a twin brother with a crazy love story. Tell them about Mason and Elise. It was a company-wide meeting. 200+ people. Cameras on. So I did what any sane person would do. I pretended Mason had died. I said he'd passed away suddenly, a freak accident, right before the wedding. I choked up. I left the call early. The next day, my inbox was full of condolence messages. Someone sent flowers. My boss gave me 3 extra days of PTO. People started a GoFundMe for Elise, which, obviously, I couldn't accept, so I had to say she was moving to France and couldn't be reached. And now, I live with the weight of this. Mason is dead. He never existed, but his ghost haunts me every single day. People still ask how I'm doing. If I need to talk. If Elise ever reaches out. Sometimes I think about holding a fake memorial service just to end it all. Sometimes I think about finding Mason's journal and sharing pages with the team. But I know it's only a matter of time before the truth comes out. Or before the real doppelganger shows up at the office. And then I'll be truly, utterly, and spectacularly screwed. TIFU by trying to impress my girlfriend with a home-cooked meal and nearly burning down the house. I've always prided myself on being a decent cook. I'm no Gordon Ramsay, but I can whip up a few dishes that will make people think I belong in a kitchen. The problem is, I've never really cooked much for anyone else, until recently, that is. My girlfriend, let's call her Sarah, and I had been dating for about 6 months when I decided it was time to do something special for her. I wanted to impress her, show her that I wasn't just a guy who could microwave frozen meals and call it a day. So, I decided to cook her a fancy, home-cooked dinner. Now, Sarah is not picky about food, but she's an absolute food enthusiast. She loves trying new things, experimenting with flavors, and can often be found scrolling through food blogs or watching cooking shows. This put a lot of pressure on me. If I messed up, I would look like a complete idiot. But I wasn't going to back down. I was going to show her that I could cook something amazing. I spent the whole day planning the menu. I wanted it to be a 3-course meal, an appetizer, a main dish, and a dessert. For the appetizer, I chose bruschetta with tomatoes and basil. It's simple, fresh, and hard to mess up, or so I thought. The main dish was going to be my grand masterpiece, a seared steak with a red wine reduction sauce, served with mashed potatoes and roasted vegetables. I had seen this recipe on a cooking show, and I thought it would be the perfect way to show off. Dessert was going to be chocolate lava cakes, because what says I love you more than molten chocolate? I got everything ready. I prepped the ingredients, made sure all my utensils and pots were in place, and set up the kitchen like I was about to film a cooking tutorial. I even put on an apron and tucked my shirt in, trying to look like I had my life together. Sarah was out with some friends that evening, so I had plenty of time to make sure everything was perfect. The first 30 minutes went off without a hitch. The bruschetta was easy to put together, and the potatoes were boiling away for the mash. I felt like a real pro. Then it came time to start cooking the steak. I had watched the video several times, and I was confident that I knew what I was doing. I seasoned the steaks, heated up my pan, and dropped them in. The sizzle was exactly what I expected, and I was feeling pretty proud of myself. But then, things started to go downhill fast. I didn't pay enough attention to the heat of the pan, and within moments, the steaks were way more seared than I had intended. I turned them over, hoping for a miracle, but the damage was done. The outside was perfectly charred, but the inside was still raw. I panicked. I turned the heat down and let the steaks cook longer, hoping to salvage them. But it was too late. I had made the classic mistake of getting too eager and not paying attention to the timing. While the steaks cooked, I moved on to the red wine sauce. At this point, I was feeling like a disaster. I had never made a wine reduction sauce before, but I figured it couldn't be that hard. I added the wine to the pan, then the broth, and started letting it simmer. It was supposed to reduce to a thick, glossy consistency. But, of course, I got distracted by the steaks. In my panic, I had turned up the heat on the sauce, thinking it would help speed up the reduction process. But instead, it started to bubble furiously and smell burnt. I rushed over to the stove and saw that I had let it go way too far. The sauce had thickened to the point of being more like a syrup, an extremely burnt syrup. I stared at it in horror, wondering if there was any way to salvage it. But I knew deep down that I had just ruined the sauce. The steaks weren't much better. I tried cutting into one to check for doneness, and it was as tough as leather. I considered just throwing them away and starting over, but then I realized I was out of time. Sarah was going to be home in 30 minutes, and I still had to pull everything together. I didn't want to disappoint her, but I also didn't want her to think I was a total failure in the kitchen. Desperation kicked in. I decided to salvage the situation by rushing through the rest of the meal. I mashed the potatoes, but they turned out too lumpy, probably because I didn't have enough butter or cream. The roasted vegetables were fine, but they had already started to dry out in the oven since I had gotten too distracted by my steak and sauce fiasco. When Sarah walked in, I was standing in the kitchen, a little sweaty and clearly frazzled. She smiled and said, "Wow, this smells amazing." She had no idea that the amazing smell was actually the burnt remnants of my failed wine sauce. I tried to play it cool, but I'm pretty sure my face gave it away. We sat down at the table, and I nervously plated everything. The bruschetta was the one thing that came out perfect, so I was grateful for that. But as we dug into the main course, I could tell something was wrong. Sarah was being polite, but she wasn't exactly raving about the steak. After a few more bites, she set her fork down. "Babe," she said, "this is, interesting." I froze. The steak's a little tough, and the sauce, well, it tastes a little burnt. I knew I couldn't lie my way out of this one. "I'm really sorry," I said. "I totally messed up the sauce, and I think I overcooked the steaks. I was trying to make something fancy, but it didn't turn out like I hoped." Sarah looked at me, then smiled. "Honestly, it's okay. The thought counts. And hey, the bruschetta is great, and the potatoes are good. It's not the worst meal I've ever had." I wanted to crawl into a hole. But I smiled and tried to laugh it off. We ended up finishing the meal, but it was clear that I wasn't going to win any cooking awards that night. The worst part? We never got to the lava cakes. By the time we were done with the main event, neither of us had the energy to deal with dessert. Instead, we ended up ordering pizza. Looking back, I definitely learned my lesson. Never try to impress someone with your cooking skills if you haven't practiced the dish 100 times. Stick to what you know, and for the love of God, don't try to make a fancy steak dinner when you've never cooked one before. At least Sarah thought it was cute, and we still laugh about it every time we talk about food. But I think I'm sticking to spaghetti and garlic bread for the next special dinner. TLDR, tried to impress my girlfriend with a fancy home-cooked meal, ruined the steak, sauce, and potatoes, and ended up ordering pizza. TIFU by inviting my friend to stay at my house and turning a peaceful weekend into a total disaster. So, here's the thing. I'm a pretty easygoing guy, and I've got a good group of friends. One of them, let's call him Matt, is one of those people who can get along with anyone but also somehow manages to create chaos without meaning to. I'd invited Matt over for a chill weekend a few weeks ago, and while I thought it'd just be a relaxing time of catching up and binge-watching TV, it turned into the most absurd series of events that still make me cringe whenever I think about it. I live in a small apartment in the city, nothing fancy, but it's cozy, and I'm comfortable there. Matt lives a few hours away, and we hadn't seen each other in a while, so when he said he was planning a visit, I was happy to host him. No big deal, right? The first warning sign should have been the text I got from him a few hours before he was supposed to arrive. It simply read, "Hey, I brought my pet iguana, hope that's cool." Now, I've known Matt for years, and he's always had some strange hobby or interest, so I wasn't that surprised. But an iguana? I wasn't exactly thrilled about it, but I thought, hey, he's my friend. I'll roll with it. I assumed it would be a small, well-behaved lizard in a cage that he would keep to himself. Boy, was I wrong. When Matt arrived, he didn't even bother mentioning the iguana at first. He just walked in, carrying a duffel bag and his usual goofy grin. "Hey, dude," he said, giving me a quick hug. We exchanged pleasantries, and I led him to the living room. That's when he casually mentioned, "Oh, yeah, I put Hank in the bedroom. He likes it there." Hank. The iguana's name was Hank. Of course it was. I was about to ask what he meant by put him in the bedroom, but Matt was already unpacking his stuff. It was then that I heard a rustling noise coming from behind the bedroom door. I froze for a second, trying to make sense of it. Maybe it was just the wind? But then the door creaked open slightly, and I saw what can only be described as an iguana the size of a small dog staring back at me. Hank was not a small pet. He was an absolute unit of a lizard, his body at least 3 feet long. He wasn't in a cage or anything, just freely roaming around the bedroom. I stood there, stunned. Matt, totally unaware of my shock, simply grinned and said, "Yeah, I let him wander around a bit. He's chill, don't worry." I don't know what I was expecting, but that was definitely not it. I told Matt I'd be fine with Hank staying in the room as long as he didn't try to escape or cause any trouble, but Matt was insistent that Hank was pretty chill. We agreed that he'd stay in the bedroom for the night, and I quickly distracted myself by setting up a movie for us to watch. The first couple of hours were fine. We ordered some pizza, caught up on life, and laughed at old stories. Matt didn't mention Hank at all. I thought maybe it was just me overreacting. Maybe it was totally normal for people to have giant iguanas hanging out in their bedrooms. That was until I went into the kitchen to grab some drinks, and I heard a strange noise coming from the hallway. It wasn't the usual creaking of the apartment, this was something heavier, like claws scraping against wood. I froze in the kitchen, my heart pounding in my chest. Slowly, I turned toward the hallway and saw Hank, the iguana, slowly making his way down the corridor. How he'd gotten out of the bedroom, I had no idea. But there he was, with his giant, scaly body dragging along the floor, completely unbothered by the fact that he was now outside his designated space. I panicked and tried to shoo him back into the bedroom, but Hank was having none of it. He stared at me with what could only be described as disdain, then lazily turned around and wandered toward the living room. I'm not sure what possessed me to do this, but I followed him. I reached down to gently nudge him back toward the bedroom, but as I did, I heard Matt from behind me. "What's going on?" "Oh, Hank's out?" "He's fine, don't worry about it. Just let him explore a bit." I wanted to scream, but I held it in. I was already feeling embarrassed about how out of control this situation had gotten, and the last thing I needed was Matt to think I was overreacting. "Okay, well, if he's fine, can we at least make sure he doesn't?" Before I could finish my sentence, Hank had wandered over to the coffee table, where we had left a half-eaten pizza. My eyes widened as Hank's long, muscular tail knocked over the pizza box, sending slices scattering across the floor. "Hank!" Matt shouted, but there was no urgency in his voice. "Not the pizza, dude." The iguana didn't seem to care, though. He slowly crawled onto the couch, and Matt gave up trying to stop him. He casually sat down next to Hank, who was now sprawled across the cushions like he owned the place. At this point, I had no idea what to do. My apartment was being taken over by a giant iguana who thought it was his new kingdom. My friend was laughing it off, acting like everything was normal. Meanwhile, I was internally spiraling, wondering how I had gone from a peaceful weekend to dealing with an iguana living its best life on my couch. The real disaster struck a few hours later when I was trying to get some sleep. Matt and I had decided to call it a night after watching a few episodes of a show, and I retreated to the bedroom to crash. I opened the door and immediately saw Hank curled up on my bed, occupying the entire space. I stood there, speechless. There was no way I was going to sleep with Hank in my bed. I had nothing against iguanas, well, not that much, but this was crossing a line. I turned to Matt, hoping for some sort of backup, but he was already snoring on the couch, oblivious to my plight. I ended up spending the night on the couch, trying to ignore the weird scratching noises Hank kept making. By the time morning came, I was exhausted, my patience worn thin. I asked Matt if he could take Hank back home early, but Matt was determined to make the best of his weekend. "I think Hank really likes it here," he said, as though the iguana was some sort of houseguest I should have been honored to host. The weekend eventually ended with me exhausted, frustrated, and more than a little confused about what had just happened. Matt left a day early, and I spent the rest of the week trying to scrub the memory of Hank off my mind. So yeah, TIFU by inviting my friend Matt over and accidentally letting his pet iguana take over my apartment for a weekend. Never again. Never. Again. So this happened a couple of weeks ago, and I still can't quite wrap my head around how much of a disaster it turned out to be. It all started on a lazy Saturday afternoon. I was home alone, scrolling through Netflix, trying to figure out what to watch when I received a text from my mom. Now, my mom is one of those people who likes to remind me every week to do stuff I've already done or to do stuff I haven't even thought about doing, and it usually ends with her offering unsolicited advice. I get it, she's trying to look out for me, but sometimes it feels like she's keeping track of every tiny thing in my life. The text this time was no different. It said, "Hey, don't forget to take out the trash. It's really starting to smell in the kitchen." I sighed, rolled my eyes, and figured I'd get to it in an hour or so. The thing is, I'm one of those people who will leave a chore for the absolute last possible moment. I have a fridge full of leftovers that are well past their prime, and the laundry situation looks like the aftermath of a tornado. But I'm getting better. I promise. Anyway, after texting back a quick "Thanks, Mom, I'll do it," I continued browsing Netflix, deciding that cleaning would definitely not be happening anytime soon. Then, I noticed something weird. There was a strange noise coming from the kitchen. It wasn't a loud sound, more like a soft thudding noise that I couldn't quite identify. Curiosity got the best of me, and I went into the kitchen to investigate. That's when I saw it. The trash can was slowly rocking back and forth like it was alive. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but then I realized the air in the room was still, and there was no reason for the can to move. Then, I heard it, a small, shrill screech followed by a strange rustling sound coming from inside the trash can. I stepped closer, and I swear I could feel my stomach churn. I hesitated, thinking maybe I was just imagining things. But then it happened again, a quick rustle followed by another screech. My heart started racing. I opened the lid of the trash can, and what I saw made me freeze in terror. A rat. But not just any rat. This rat was dragging something. At first, I couldn't tell what it was, but as the rat pulled it out of the trash, I saw the unmistakable shape of a slice of pizza. Now, this wouldn't have been that big of a deal if the pizza hadn't been from a week ago. In fact, the pizza had been covered in mold and had become so rock hard that I wasn't sure if it was still edible by any definition of the word. And here was this rat, dragging it around like it was the finest delicacy it had ever encountered. I stepped back, trying to suppress the urge to gag. But that's when the rat saw me. It stopped dead in its tracks and stared right at me. I'm pretty sure it had just as much of a "what are you doing here" look on its face as I had on mine. But before I could react, the rat bolted off, carrying the pizza slice like a prize in its tiny claws. In a panic, I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, a broom, and began waving it around, trying to scare the rat away. But no matter how much I thrashed it in the air, the rat was too quick, dodging and darting around like it had perfected some kind of ninja-like escape maneuver. I was running around the kitchen like a madman, broom in hand, trying to get rid of the rat while simultaneously avoiding any direct contact with its disgusting, pizza-covered paws. This continued for what felt like hours, but I'm sure it was only a few minutes before I finally gave up. I stood in the middle of the kitchen, panting, completely defeated. I could still hear the rat rummaging around the trash can, and I knew there was no way I was going to get any sleep tonight with the thought of a pizza-carrying rat loose in my kitchen. But I needed to do something about this, so I grabbed my phone and texted my mom, fully expecting her to be the voice of reason. Instead, my phone buzzed with a new message: just make sure you get rid of the trash before it gets worse. Oh, the irony. In a fit of desperation, I decided I needed professional help. I Googled pest control near me and quickly called the first number that came up. The person on the other end assured me they'd send someone over right away. I told them about the rat, the pizza, and the fact that I felt like I was about to lose my mind. Within the hour, a technician showed up. I let him into the kitchen, and the moment he laid eyes on the scene, I could see his eyes widen. I explained the situation, but he didn't seem particularly fazed. Instead, he pulled out a set of tools from his bag and began assessing the problem. I stood by, half expecting him to ask where the rat was hiding, but instead, he just pulled out a bag and said, "I'll handle it. You just stay back." He took one look at the pizza slice, wrapped it up in some kind of protective cloth, and dropped it into a trash bag. He sealed it up tight, and that was that. No more pizza rat drama. But then, to my surprise, he turned to me and said, "All right, I'll take care of everything else, but you really need to clean up around here. There's a whole lot of trash you're letting pile up." I was mortified. Apparently, the rat had been living off the trash in my kitchen for days, maybe even weeks. Not only had I been too lazy to take out the trash, but I had become a rat's buffet. The technician left, and I stood there, staring at the now rat-free kitchen, feeling more embarrassed than I've ever felt in my life. My mom's text from earlier, the one I had so casually brushed off, suddenly seemed like a prophecy. I realized that I wasn't just being lazy, I was actively inviting chaos into my life. The worst part? I still haven't told anyone else about the rat. I don't think I can ever look my friends or family in the eye again. I've taken out the trash every week since then. But every time I lift that lid, I swear I can still hear that rat's tiny, squeaky laugh in my head. Moral of the story: always listen to your mom. And don't let your trash pile up so high you end up with a rat hoarding moldy pizza in your kitchen. TIFU by trying to fix my car myself and accidentally turning it into a demolition derby. So, here's the situation. I've always prided myself on being a hands-on kind of guy. I'm not a mechanic by any means, but I've done a few minor repairs on my car in the past. Oil changes, replacing wiper blades, swapping out a headlight here and there, that's my jam. But the other day, I decided to try something a little more ambitious. Long story short, it did not go well. It all started when my car's brakes started squeaking. At first, it was just a mild annoyance, but after a few days, the noise became louder and more frequent. You know that sound when your brakes are worn down and they start to scrape against the rotor? Yeah, that was happening. I figured it was time to change the brake pads, and I thought, hey, I've done enough small repairs, how hard could it be? I did a bit of research on YouTube, watched a few videos of people swapping brake pads, and felt pretty confident. I mean, how hard can it be to take off a wheel, remove the old pads, and slap on some new ones? If they can do it in under 10 minutes, surely I can manage, right? I grabbed my tools and set up in the garage. The first step was to jack up the car. I remember thinking, this part seems easy enough. I slid the jack under the car, gave it a few cranks, and lifted the car up. But here's where I should have paused and taken a moment to assess the situation. For some reason, I didn't put the car on jack stands, thinking, it'll be fine for just a few minutes. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. Next, I got the lug nuts off the wheel and removed it. Everything was going smoothly. I felt pretty proud of myself. That was until I tried to remove the caliper. Apparently, I wasn't aware that it was more complicated than just unscrewing a bolt. I tried to wiggle it loose, using all my strength and ingenuity, but the damn thing wouldn't budge. Now, a logical person might have thought, maybe I should look this up again or call a professional. But no, not me. I thought, I'm gonna figure this out. So, I resorted to what anyone in my situation would do, brute force. I took a hammer to the caliper bolts. Not just a gentle tap. Oh no, I really went to town on them. The problem is, I wasn't paying attention to the position of the hammer, and at some point, I managed to slip and strike the brake line. Cue the panic. I didn't realize what I had done at first, but as I hit the caliper a final time, there was a sudden loud whoosh, and brake fluid started spraying everywhere. Not just a little dribble, but a full-on geyser of brake fluid shooting from the line I had just punctured. For a split second, I stood there, frozen, watching as the fluid sprayed across the garage floor, and then realized, my car was now in a critical condition. I immediately scrambled to turn off the brake fluid valve, but there was no chance of stopping the mess I had created. I grabbed a rag and tried to wipe it all up, but now I had a bigger problem on my hands. I had ruined the brake line. I needed to replace it, which meant I had to take apart even more of the car than I originally intended. I was deep into a nightmare scenario, and I was just getting started. It was about this time that my neighbor, a retired mechanic named Bob, came walking by, probably attracted by the smell of burnt rubber and the loud banging I had been doing. He looked at me and said, "Everything okay over here?" I explained my situation in a somewhat embarrassed, rambling manner, and he just shook his head. "You're gonna need more than just brake pads now, kid," he said with a smirk. "Let me take a look." Bob took one glance at the mess I had created, then looked me dead in the eyes. "You've really gone and done it now, huh?" He laughed. At that point, I wasn't sure whether to laugh or cry, so I just stood there awkwardly, unsure of what to say. Bob spent the next 30 minutes giving me a crash course in brake systems, teaching me how to properly replace a brake line, and showing me the correct way to disassemble and reassemble a caliper. He even let me borrow some of his tools, which was nice of him, but I could tell that he was enjoying my misery a little too much. At this point, I felt like I was in too deep. The brake line needed to be replaced, the caliper was still stuck, and I was now covered in brake fluid. I just wanted to get it over with, so I decided to take Bob up on his offer to help. We spent the next couple of hours working on my car, getting it back into a somewhat drivable condition. The whole time, Bob was giving me a hard time, making jokes about how I was definitely not cut out for the car repair life. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we got the new brake line in place, the caliper reassembled, and the brake pads replaced. It took way longer than I had anticipated, and I'd definitely spent more money than I ever intended to. But at least I had learned a valuable lesson. Bob gave me a pat on the back as we finished up. "Next time," he said, "just call me first. I'm retired, but I'm not dead yet." I drove my car for the first time after the repair, and everything seemed fine. The brakes worked, the car didn't make any weird noises, and I didn't crash. I was relieved, but also kind of ashamed of my mistake. I realized that, sometimes, trying to save a buck and do things yourself can end up costing you more in the long run. So yeah, TIFU by trying to fix my brakes myself and accidentally turning my car into a project that involved more tools, more time, and more money than I was prepared for. I've learned my lesson. If you're not sure, leave it to the professionals. Also, don't hit brake lines with a hammer. That's just asking for trouble. So, this happened a few weeks ago and it's still embarrassing to think about. It all started on a regular Sunday morning when I decided I was going to do something productive for once. I had just moved into my new apartment a few months ago, and, honestly, I hadn't unpacked as much as I should have. The place looked like a war zone of cardboard boxes and random piles of stuff. The plan was simple: clean, organize, and get rid of the junk I didn't need. I was feeling motivated, and the weather was nice, so I threw on some old sweatpants and an oversized hoodie, figuring I would just spend the day deep cleaning everything. After a couple of hours of sorting through clothes, old books, and random knickknacks, I decided to tackle the kitchen. That's when things went downhill. I live in a fairly small apartment complex, and I share a wall with my neighbor, who I'd never really met. The only time I had seen them was when I was moving in, and they seemed like a quiet, introverted person. I had never heard them making noise or anything, which was a little weird given how thin the walls are. But hey, no complaints, right? Now, back to the kitchen. I opened a cabinet, and I found a small box of cleaning supplies I had completely forgotten about. There was a bottle of all-purpose cleaner in there, and I figured I'd give the countertops a good scrub. In my mind, this was going to be the moment I turned my apartment from disaster zone to a sparkling clean oasis. Little did I know, I was about to trigger a series of events that would haunt me for weeks. I grabbed the cleaner and gave the countertops a good spritz. But, as I was wiping it down, I noticed a weird smell. It wasn't the fresh lemony scent of the cleaner. It was more like something burning. I looked up and saw that there was a bit of smoke coming from my oven. I freaked out and rushed to open it, thinking maybe I had accidentally left something in there. But no, the oven was empty. At this point, I'm starting to panic. I'm running around the apartment trying to figure out where the smoke is coming from. I checked every outlet, every appliance, and then, just as I was about to call the fire department, I noticed a strange, almost ethereal sound coming from the wall where my neighbor's apartment was. It was a faint scratching or tapping noise. A little unnerving, but not super alarming at first. I figured maybe my neighbor was doing some kind of construction work or working on something with power tools. But then, it clicked. The smell I had been noticing wasn't from my kitchen at all. It was coming from their side. That's when I realized I hadn't heard from them in a while. Maybe they were working on something complicated, and something had gone wrong. Curiosity got the best of me, and I started walking over to the wall. I placed my ear against it, trying to hear more clearly. At this point, the smoke was thicker, and I could see wisps coming from beneath my door. I freaked out even more, now fully convinced that a fire was happening on the other side of the wall, and I was just waiting for my place to go up in flames. But the noise from the other side of the wall, it was growing louder. I distinctly heard a voice. It was muffled, but it was there, and the voice didn't sound calm. In fact, it sounded panicked. I swear I heard something like no, 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 followed by a series of rapid bangs. Was my neighbor having some kind of crisis? A mental breakdown? What was going on? In a moment of pure anxiety, I dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? The operator answered. I was practically shouting, my neighbor is having some kind of emergency. I don't know what's going on, but there's smoke coming from their side, and I think they're in trouble. Please send someone. The operator, thankfully calm, assured me that they were sending a unit to check it out, but to stay away from the wall. They said the smoke might be a sign of something dangerous, and to leave the building immediately. So, I did. I grabbed my phone, wallet, and keys, and rushed outside to wait by my car. A few minutes later, the fire department and police showed up. I watched from a distance as they entered the building. It wasn't long before I saw them walk out with my neighbor, who appeared to be completely fine, albeit a little confused. Apparently, the fire was small and isolated, caused by a malfunctioning space heater they had in their apartment. But what absolutely shocked me was when I found out how my neighbor was involved in all this. According to the officers, the reason they were panicked and yelling was because they had been trying to hide something in their apartment and had accidentally set it on fire while trying to cover it up. What was that something, you ask? Well, it turns out my neighbor had been growing, a small marijuana garden. And the reason they were so frantic and confused when the fire department arrived? They thought their stash had gone up in flames. Naturally, this story got a lot juicier when the police spoke to me afterward. Apparently, they had to confiscate the entire operation, and some additional items, from the neighbor's apartment. It was completely legal to grow marijuana where I live, but they had failed to follow some of the key guidelines, such as proper ventilation and fire safety. My neighbor was also apparently using a DIY setup that was, well, not up to code. Anyway, in the end, my neighbor wasn't arrested or anything. They were just fined for some violations, but it was definitely an awkward situation. I wish I could say that the moral of the story was about fire safety or the importance of being a good neighbor, but no. The real moral is, don't get involved in someone else's problems, especially when they involve things you don't understand. My neighbor and I still don't talk much. Every time we pass each other in the hallway, I get the feeling they know that I know, but neither of us is bringing it up. Oh, and my apartment is still a mess. But at least now I know how not to start a fire. Hey, friends! If you enjoy this content, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. We really want to know what you like and what can be improved. What do you think of the video? Are there any topics you'd like to see in future videos? Your feedback really helps us get better. Thanks for being with us. TIFU, by trying to impress my boss with a homemade cake. I had always considered myself a pretty decent cook. Nothing extraordinary, but I could follow recipes, and things generally turned out edible. But my office was full of foodies, people who could appreciate the finer points of a well-made dish, especially desserts. One day, I found myself scrolling through Pinterest, just looking at recipes I'd never try in a million years, when one particular cake caught my eye. It was a lemon drizzle cake, light, fluffy, and perfect. The recipe had over 1,000 pins, so it must have been a winner, right? I had this brilliant idea. My boss, Susan, had mentioned in passing that she loved lemon cake. I didn't know much about her preferences beyond that, but I figured this could be my moment to shine. The whole office was going to love me, and maybe even elevate my standing. Plus, I had been hearing rumors that there were some new projects opening up, and I wanted to be seen as a team player and a good cook who could provide for the group. What better way than to bring in a homemade cake? It would show initiative and make me stand out in a positive way. Maybe this would even get me noticed for that big promotion that had been on my mind. So, I went out and bought all the ingredients: fresh lemons, eggs, flour, sugar, and butter. I even picked up some fancy lemon zest and a new cake pan because, nothing says I'm serious about this like new equipment. That weekend, I prepared myself to bake. I was going to follow that recipe down to the letter. I preheated the oven, measured out everything with precision, and mixed the batter. It seemed easy enough, but something felt off as I poured the batter into the pan. It was thicker than I expected. I thought, maybe the recipe is just a little misleading. I was an amateur, sure, but I wasn't stupid. I figured it would still turn out fine. I slid the pan into the oven and set a timer for 30 minutes. The cake began to rise, filling the kitchen with a smell that made me feel confident. After the timer dinged, I took it out, and the cake looked okay. Not the light, fluffy texture I imagined, but it wasn't a disaster either. I let it cool for a bit and then moved on to the next step, making the lemon drizzle. The drizzle was supposed to be a simple syrup made from lemon juice and powdered sugar. I poured the lemon juice in a bowl, added the sugar, and whisked it together. The idea was to pour it over the warm cake so it would soak in and give it that glossy finish. Well, I'm not sure if I misunderstood the ratio or if I was just too focused on making it perfect, but I accidentally added too much sugar. The mixture ended up more like a frosting than a drizzle. A very thick frosting. Still, I went with it, thinking it would just be extra sweet. I spread the thick syrup over the cake, and that's when I realized something was seriously wrong. The cake was not holding up. The edges started to crumble, and the drizzle was not setting in. Instead, it was sliding off like a melting glacier. Okay, no big deal, I thought. I'll just add more drizzle, and it'll be fine. I poured on the extra syrup, hoping to fix the situation, but it only made it worse. The cake, already a bit too dense, was now a soggy, crumbly mess of lemony goo. Panic set in. This was supposed to be my shining moment, and it was turning into a disaster. I had no backup plan. I thought about just tossing it and pretending I was too busy to bake, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. After all, I had already invested so much effort. I tried to salvage it by covering up the worst parts with a sprinkling of powdered sugar, hoping it would at least make it look somewhat presentable. It didn't work. The cake looked like a sad, squishy, lemony disaster. Now, I had to figure out how to bring this mess to work the next day. I couldn't exactly show up empty-handed, could I? So, I wrapped the thing in plastic wrap, hoping it would somehow come together overnight, like one of those movie moments where the messy situation turns into something magical. Spoiler alert, it did not. The next morning, I reluctantly brought the cake into the office, hoping the people there would be kind enough not to make too much of a fuss. Susan was already there, and she was genuinely excited when I walked in holding the cake. "Wow, you made this?" "It looks amazing," she said, and I almost believed her for a second. I couldn't bring myself to say anything about the disaster I had created, so I just nodded and tried to smile. People started gathering around the break room, curious about the cake. I sliced it up into small pieces and handed them out to everyone, praying no one would notice how bad it looked, or worse, how it tasted. Susan took a piece first, and I watched her as she took a bite. Her face didn't immediately change, but I could see her trying to mask her reaction. She was too polite to say anything, but the others weren't so tactful. One person took a bite and immediately made a face. "Is this supposed to be cake?" they asked. Someone else chimed in, "It's really wet." Like, not in a good way. Another person, bless their heart, tried to swallow but looked like they were about to gag. "Is this raw in the middle?" someone else whispered loudly. The worst part was when my coworker, who was always trying to one-up everyone, took a bite and immediately went, "Oh, yeah, this is definitely not what I expected. This is something." Susan then said, "It's fine. I'm sure it tastes better than it looks." But I could tell she was struggling not to look horrified. The whole office proceeded to avoid the cake like it was some kind of food-based contagion. People politely picked at the edges, trying to mask the awkwardness, but it was clear no one wanted to eat it. I, of course, still forced myself to have a slice, trying to convince myself that maybe I was just overreacting. But no, it was bad. Really bad. It tasted like sugar-coated soggy lemons with a weird, chewy texture. To make matters worse, Susan noticed my discomfort and asked, "Are you okay? You look a little pale." I had to fake a smile and say I was fine, but I could feel my cheeks burning. I was embarrassed, humiliated, and feeling like a failure. I had tried so hard to do something nice, and it had completely backfired. By the end of the day, the cake was still there, half-eaten and neglected. I didn't dare go near it again. I couldn't bring myself to face it. I was pretty sure that cake had officially made me the laughingstock of the office. And Susan? Well, she never mentioned it again. I've learned my lesson. Don't try to impress people with things you're not 100% sure you can pull off. And if you do decide to bake a cake, maybe don't drown it in sugar. I also made a mental note to never try to impress my boss again with baked goods. Instead, I'll just stick to what I know, bringing in store-bought snacks that are safe, reliable, and, most importantly, edible. And as for the promotion? I think that lemon cake may have sealed my fate. But hey, at least I tried. TIFU by trying to impress my crush with a romantic dinner and accidentally setting the kitchen on fire. So, I, 24M, have been crushing on this girl, Sarah, 23F, 4 months now. We met through mutual friends, and she's one of those effortlessly cool people that everyone loves to be around. She's smart, funny, and absolutely stunning, basically everything I've ever wanted in a person. I've been trying to find the perfect way to let her know how I feel, and after a few casual hangouts and some hints dropped on my side, I thought it was time to step things up a notch. Enter the idea of a romantic dinner. Now, here's the thing. I'm not exactly a chef. I can microwave a pizza, make instant noodles, and that's about it. But, I figured, how hard could it be? It's just a dinner, right? I mean, people do this all the time in the movies, and it's always this big grand gesture where everything goes perfectly. So, I thought I'd cook a nice meal for Sarah at my place. I'd make something fancy, maybe a pasta dish with a nice wine, and set the mood with candles and soft music. A foolproof plan, right? Wrong. I spent the entire day researching recipes online, watching videos, and reading up on all the things I would need. After browsing for hours, I settled on a simple spaghetti carbonara. It seemed like the perfect dish, easy to make, not too fancy, but still impressive. Plus, I could add my own personal twist with a side of garlic bread and a nice bottle of red wine. It was a full-on romantic dinner setup. I even planned to set the table with a few candles for ambience. I was going to blow her away. Fast forward to the evening. Sarah texts me to let me know she's on her way, and I'm feeling confident. The house is clean, the candles are lit, and I'm halfway through cooking the pasta. I've got my ingredients ready: eggs, pancetta, parmesan, and the most important thing, my one and only bottle of wine. All I have to do now is pull everything together and make it look like I know what I'm doing. Easy enough, right? I start cooking the pancetta, and that's where things go south. I may have gotten a bit too eager with the heat, and instead of gently browning the pancetta, I managed to turn it into a literal small fire. At first, I thought it was just some smoke, but no. The next thing I know, the whole pan is filled with flames. I panic and try to shake the pan, but this only makes it worse. In a desperate attempt to put out the fire, I grabbed the closest thing I could find, a bottle of water. I should have known that water and grease don't mix. The second the water hit the pan, the fire exploded. It was like something out of a movie. A large ball of fire shot up, and I jumped back, knocking over a bottle of olive oil in the process. At this point, I'm screaming in panic, my mind completely blanking on what to do. My kitchen is a mess, the fire is growing, and I'm starting to regret every decision that led me to this moment. I can hear Sarah knocking on my door, completely unaware of the chaos happening in my kitchen. But now, I'm stuck in a situation where I can't stop the fire and I can't just leave it. I grab the fire extinguisher. Thankfully, I had one, but in my panicked state, I forget how to properly use it. I point it at the fire, pull the pin, and nothing happens. I frantically shake the extinguisher, but still no luck. By now, the fire has spread to the counter, and the whole kitchen smells like burnt bacon. My heart is racing, and I'm starting to think I might need to call the fire department. Just as I'm about to dial 911, I hear Sarah's voice outside the door. She's standing there, probably wondering why I haven't let her in yet. In a split second, I make a decision. I'll just open the door, pretend like everything is fine, and act like this isn't happening. Maybe she won't notice. Spoiler alert, she noticed. I open the door to see her standing there with a bottle of wine and a smile, and she immediately looks past me into the kitchen. The look on her face goes from excitement to complete shock in about 0.2 seconds. Her eyes widen as she takes in the sight of my flaming kitchen. Are you cooking?" she asks, her voice barely concealing the shock. I stare at her, unsure of how to respond. I was, but, there's been a slight complication. She steps into the kitchen, surveying the scene like a battlefield. The flames are still flickering on the stove, and the smoke alarm starts blaring loudly. Sarah immediately takes control of the situation, grabbing the fire extinguisher from me, shaking it correctly, and finally putting out the flames with ease. "Okay, we're going to pretend that didn't happen," she says calmly, but I can hear the hint of laughter in her voice. At this point, I'm standing there, humiliated, red-faced, and not sure whether to laugh or cry. The meal I spent all day preparing is ruined, my kitchen is a disaster, and I'm genuinely worried I might have ruined the whole night. But Sarah? She's surprisingly chill about the whole thing. She walks over to the table I'd set, checks out the candles, and gives a small chuckle. I see you were going for the full romantic vibe, huh? I swear I can cook, I say, half embarrassed, half defeated. She smiles and shakes her head. I can see that. Want to salvage the night, though? I'm too embarrassed to answer. My whole plan has been completely derailed, and I'm not sure where to go from here. But Sarah just laughs and says, let's just order pizza, and we can pretend this never happened. It's about the company, right? To my surprise, we end up having a great time. We order pizza, drink the wine, and talk for hours. Honestly, it ended up being one of the best nights I've had in a long time. I didn't get the romantic dinner I envisioned, but in the end, I think Sarah appreciated the effort, and the fact that I didn't burn the house down. A few weeks later, we ended up going on a real date, and this time I didn't try cooking. She still laughs about the romantic disaster whenever it comes up, but we both agree it was one of those moments that makes a relationship even better. So yeah, I definitely messed up, but at least I learned to never try to impress anyone with a fancy dinner unless I know what I'm doing. And if you ever think about cooking something complicated for a date, maybe just order the pizza first. It might save your kitchen, your pride, and your evening. The moral of the story? Don't try to cook when you're nervous. And never, ever mix water with a grease fire. I'm just lucky she still liked me after all that. TLDR, tried to impress my crush with a homemade romantic dinner, set the kitchen on fire, and almost destroyed the evening. Luckily, she was cool with ordering pizza instead. TIFU by trying to impress my girlfriend and accidentally causing a small fire in the process. So, this happened a few months ago, and I've been too embarrassed to tell anyone until now. I, M24, have been dating my girlfriend, Emily, F22, for about a year. She's amazing, kind, intelligent, and, to be honest, way out of my league. I often feel like I have to go the extra mile to keep her interested, though, because sometimes I think she might get bored of me and realize she could do better. Anyway, that's my issue, not hers. So, like I said, I really like her, and I wanted to do something special for our anniversary. I knew that Emily loved candles. I mean, she was obsessed with them. Every time we'd go shopping together, she'd always pick out a new one, and her apartment smelled like a small boutique candle shop. The problem? She was always the one who bought them, and I never really put much thought into candle selection. I figured it couldn't be that hard to get a good candle, right? Wrong. I did some research, mainly on Pinterest, about making homemade candles. How hard could it be? I thought, I can handle this. It'll be a thoughtful gift, and it'll show her I care. So, the plan was to make my own candles and surprise her with a beautifully personalized set. It'd be romantic, unique, and I could finally one-up her on something she loved. Plus, I'd get bonus points for making them myself. I spent the next few days watching YouTube tutorials, reading up on candle-making blogs, and getting all the supplies. I even went the extra mile and ordered some fancy scents. I picked out vanilla, lavender, and something called autumn leaves, which I thought would smell cozy. I was feeling pretty confident about it. The day came, and I had all the supplies laid out. I had wax, wicks, fragrance oils, dye, and a couple of mason jars to pour the candles into. I didn't even consider the mess that was about to happen. I just thought, all right, let's do this. I started melting the wax, which seemed easy enough. I was feeling good about it. Then, I added the fragrance oil, but I wasn't quite sure how much to add. So, I just went with what seemed like a reasonable amount. Maybe too much. The scent was strong, but I told myself that was just part of the charm. I didn't know what I was doing, but it felt like I was on the right track. Then, I added the dye to make the candles look more aesthetically pleasing, and everything seemed perfect. Next came the tricky part, pouring the wax into the mason jars. I'd read that you had to wait for the wax to cool just enough so it wouldn't be too runny, but also not so solid that it wouldn't pour. I thought I nailed the temperature, and everything was ready to go. I carefully poured the wax into the jars, but I was so eager that I wasn't paying enough attention to the temperature of the wax or the placement of the jars. As I poured the last of the wax into the final jar, I noticed something alarming. The wax was starting to bubble. And not in the "oh, this is part of the process" way. It was more like a "this is definitely not supposed to be happening" way. The air in the room started to smell like burning vanilla, and that's when I realized I had made a grave mistake. I had overheated the wax. At some point, it had gotten way too hot, and now it was slowly turning into a sticky, smoking mess. At first, I panicked. The room was starting to fill with smoke, and I had no idea what to do. I didn't want to ruin the whole surprise, but I couldn't just leave the kitchen and pretend nothing was wrong. I quickly grabbed the mason jars and tried to move them away from the heat source, but in my haste, I knocked one of the jars over. The wax splashed onto the counter and immediately started sizzling. Great. Now the counter was on fire. I was standing there frozen for a moment, completely unsure what to do. I grabbed the first thing I could find, an oven mitt, and slapped it onto the wax. This did nothing except smear the wax further and start a small fire in the mitt itself. The flames were starting to spread, and my entire kitchen was starting to feel like a disaster zone. I couldn't believe this was happening. I panicked and ran to the sink, filled a cup with water, and tossed it onto the flames. Big mistake. I don't know why I thought pouring water on burning wax was a good idea, but it made the fire spread even faster. The wax started to sizzle and spatter like some kind of terrifying science experiment. At this point, I realized I had to act fast. I grabbed the fire extinguisher from under the sink and sprayed the entire kitchen. The foam shot out, covering everything. It was chaotic, messy, and definitely not how I had envisioned our anniversary going. Finally, after a few minutes of disaster management, the fire was out, and I was standing in the middle of a now foam-covered kitchen, staring at the half-melted, failed candles. There were bits of wax stuck everywhere, on the counter, the floor, my clothes, and, most notably, my ego. I was devastated. Not only had I almost set my kitchen on fire, but I had completely ruined the candles I had worked so hard on. So, I did what anyone in my situation would do. I cleaned up the mess as best I could, called Emily, and told her that there was a small fire in my kitchen. She was understandably freaked out and told me to take a deep breath. She thought I was joking at first, but when she realized I wasn't, she came over to check on me. When she arrived, I was standing there with a half-burned fire extinguisher in my hand, looking like a complete disaster. I told her everything. She looked at the mess and then at me, and after a long pause, she started laughing. Not in a mean way, just genuinely laughing. She said it was one of the funniest things she had ever heard, and in a way, she was kind of impressed that I had gone all out trying to make her a special gift. Despite the disaster, Emily said she appreciated the effort, but I could tell I'd probably never live this down. She helped me clean up the kitchen, and we ended up ordering takeout for dinner. It wasn't the anniversary I had envisioned, but at least I had a funny story to tell. Moral of the story: don't try to make homemade candles unless you really know what you're doing, and always have a fire extinguisher nearby. Also, maybe just stick to buying the candles that she loves. It's safer for everyone. TLDR, tried to make homemade candles for my girlfriend's anniversary to impress her, almost set my kitchen on fire, ruined the candles, and ended up cleaning up foam with her while she laughed at my failure. TIFU by trying to surprise my girlfriend with a romantic dinner and ending up in the ER. So, I thought I was being the perfect boyfriend. My girlfriend, let's call her Sarah, and I had been dating for about 2 years, and I really wanted to show her how much I appreciated her. She had been working long hours at her job, and I could tell that she was stressed and exhausted. I wanted to do something nice for her, something that would help her unwind and feel special. After some thinking, I decided to cook her a romantic dinner at home. Now, I'm not a terrible cook, but I'm not exactly a chef either. I know how to make a few decent meals, but most of them are pretty basic, think pasta, stir-fry, that kind of thing. But tonight, I was determined to go above and beyond. I planned to make her favorite dish, which is a fancy chicken Alfredo with garlic bread and a small salad on the side. The idea was that I would make the meal, set up a beautiful table with candles and flowers, and surprise her when she got home. I spent the whole afternoon getting everything together. I even watched a couple of YouTube videos on how to make the perfect Alfredo sauce from scratch. I was feeling pretty confident at this point, like I was nailing it. I got the chicken cooking, the pasta boiling, and the sauce coming together just like the video said. Things were looking good. But of course, as the sauce was thickening, I realized that the recipe called for heavy cream. I didn't have any heavy cream in the fridge. No problem, I thought. I could just go to the store quickly and pick some up. I grabbed my keys, threw on my jacket, and made a beeline for the grocery store, determined to get back before Sarah arrived. When I got to the store, I headed straight to the dairy section. There were a few options for heavy cream, but I spotted something that caught my eye, a large carton of whipping cream that was on sale. Now, in my mind, this was basically the same thing as heavy cream, right? It's creamy, it's dairy, close enough. So I grabbed the carton, rushed to the checkout, and headed back home. When I got back, I was feeling the pressure. Sarah would be home any minute, and I wanted everything to be perfect. I added the whipping cream to the sauce, and immediately noticed that it didn't thicken as quickly as I had hoped. I kept stirring, but the sauce seemed a bit off. It was thinner than I wanted, and there was something about the texture that just didn't look right. Still, I convinced myself that it would be fine once it cooked down a little. Maybe I'd just let it simmer a bit longer. I put everything together, plated it beautifully, chicken Alfredo with a side of garlic bread and a fresh salad, and set it on the table, lighting the candles. At this point, I was feeling pretty proud of myself. Everything was set up perfectly. I even poured a glass of wine to make it extra fancy. When Sarah came through the door, she looked exhausted but smiled when she saw the setup. "Oh my God, this looks amazing," she said, her tired eyes lighting up. "You really didn't have to do this." I smiled and kissed her cheek. "You deserve it," I said. "Just sit down and relax. Dinner is ready." She sat down, and we started eating. Honestly, everything seemed to be going well at first. Sarah was impressed by how it all looked, and she took a few bites of the chicken Alfredo. I nervously watched her face for any sign that something was wrong, but she didn't seem to notice anything. That was until she took another bite and then paused. She put her fork down slowly and looked at me. What did you put in this sauce?" I was taken aback. "What do you mean?" "It's just the Alfredo sauce. You like it, right?" She looked at me, her eyebrows furrowed. "I mean, it's really sweet. It's kind of weird. Like it's got a taste of sugar or something." I froze. My heart sank. I had noticed that the sauce had a strange taste, but I had chalked it up to the whipping cream being a little different. I hadn't actually tasted it before serving. But now that she mentioned it, I realized what had happened. I had used whipping cream instead of heavy cream, and the whipping cream had sugar in it to help stabilize it for desserts. I was horrified. Before I could say anything, Sarah took another bite and then suddenly stopped again, her face going pale. She quickly put down her fork and grabbed a napkin to dab her mouth. "Hey, you okay?" I asked, my stomach sinking as I watched her. "I think I need some water," she said quickly, standing up and walking toward the kitchen. I followed her, trying to figure out what was happening. When she got to the sink, she bent over it, hands on the counter. I feel really weird, like my stomach is turning. Panic started to set in. I realized that I had messed up big time. It was the cream, the sugar in the whipping cream, that had caused this reaction. But I didn't know what to do. I tried to calm her down, but it was clear she was starting to feel worse. She stumbled a bit and then grabbed her stomach. "I think I need to go to the hospital," she muttered, her voice shaky. In a panic, I drove her straight to the emergency room, all the while trying to apologize over and over again. The entire drive, she just clutched her stomach and groaned in pain. I felt like the worst boyfriend in the world. When we got to the ER, they immediately took her in. The doctors were quick to determine that it was indeed the sugar in the whipping cream that had caused her stomach to react poorly. They said that the high sugar content, combined with the richness of the cream, was messing with her digestion and causing her nausea and cramps. Luckily, they assured me it wasn't anything too serious, but they did have to monitor her for a while. After a few hours, they let her go, and we drove home quietly. She was still feeling off, but at least she was okay. I apologized profusely the entire time, but she was more amused than upset. "I can't believe you made me go to the hospital over dinner," she said, trying not to laugh. "You really went all out with that surprise, huh?" I couldn't help but laugh too, even though I was mortified. I had tried so hard to do something nice, and instead, I ended up almost sending her to the ER. Needless to say, I'll never make that mistake again. The next time I try to cook something fancy, I'll make sure to double-check the ingredients, and maybe stick to something a little simpler, like pasta. TLDR, tried to cook my girlfriend a romantic dinner with homemade chicken Alfredo, but accidentally used whipping cream instead of heavy cream, which caused her stomach to react badly. We ended up in the ER, but luckily, she's okay. TIFU by trying to impress my crush with a romantic dinner, but everything went terribly wrong. So, let me set the scene. I've been eyeing this girl at work for a few months now. She's sweet, smart, funny, basically everything you could want in a person. I'd been trying to figure out a way to ask her out, but I'm not exactly the smoothest guy when it comes to that. After some serious thought, I came up with the brilliant idea of impressing her with a homemade dinner. I mean, how hard could it be, right? I'd watched enough cooking shows to think I could pull it off. Plus, I figured this would show her that I was thoughtful and willing to put in some effort. The plan was set. I'd cook a nice, fancy meal, and we'd have a relaxed, intimate evening. I didn't want to go too overboard, but I also didn't want to look like I was slacking off. I decided to make a classic 3-course dinner, a salad for the starter, a steak with mashed potatoes and roasted veggies for the main, and a chocolate lava cake for dessert. Simple enough, right? I had the whole day off, so I figured I'd have plenty of time to prep. I even researched some tips on cooking steak perfectly, because I'm not some kind of chef, and how to make sure the lava cake came out gooey without being undercooked or a total disaster. I went to the grocery store, picked out all the ingredients, and even remembered to get a bottle of wine to set the mood. I thought I was on top of everything. Now, I should mention that I live in a small apartment, so there's not a whole lot of space to work with. But no problem, I figured this was going to be fine. I had a few hours before she was supposed to arrive, and I was feeling confident. The plan was to have everything ready so all I'd have to do is cook the steak and heat up the cake when she arrived. Easy, right? I started with the salad. That part actually went well. I chopped everything up, added the dressing, and set it aside. But then, the real trouble started when I moved on to the main course. The steak was supposed to be the star of the meal, and I was determined to get it right. I seasoned it well and heated up the pan, ready to sear it to perfection. I have a fairly small stove, and when I put the first steak in the pan, the entire kitchen filled with smoke. I didn't think much of it at first, but then it got worse. I could barely see through the cloud of smoke in the room, and the smoke alarm started going off. I'm frantically waving a towel at the alarm, trying to silence it, but that only makes the smoke worse. I open all the windows, hoping to clear it out, but now the smoke is pouring out of the kitchen and into the living room. At this point, I've completely lost my cool. I'm still trying to cook the steak, but it's burned on one side and undercooked on the other. I decide to flip it over and salvage it. I don't know why I thought this was a good idea, but I ended up flipping it with the same tongs I had used to handle raw meat. Suddenly, I realize that I've just contaminated the cooked side with raw meat juices. Great. So now I have a perfectly messed up steak with food safety concerns. I panic and try to fix it. I take the steak off the heat, shove it onto a plate, and throw the other steak in the pan. I'm thinking, okay, at least I can salvage this one. But no. I realize that in my panic, I completely forgot to turn the heat down. The second steak starts to burn almost immediately. Now, I'm staring at two ruined steaks, both of which are either overcooked, undercooked, or unsafe to eat. I briefly consider ordering takeout. But no, I can't do that. I'm not going to let this entire evening fall apart. I throw the steaks out and start over. This time, I figure I'll try the oven. I season the steaks again and stick them in the oven, praying that this will work better. While they cook, I turn my attention to the mashed potatoes. This should be easy, right? Wrong. The potatoes are all over the place. I get them boiling, but in my stress, I forget to mash them properly, and now I've got a clumpy mess of potatoes that's just not looking right. I try adding more butter, more cream, trying to fix it, but it only makes it worse. The potatoes are now some weird hybrid of mashed and lumpy, and I'm about to lose it. I check the oven. The steaks have turned into something resembling shoe leather. Fantastic. At this point, I've got the main course in total disarray. The cake, thankfully, seems to be okay. But now, the chocolate lava cake, which, mind you, is supposed to be the crown jewel of this whole meal, decides it has its own plans. I follow the recipe exactly, but when I cut into it, there's no lava. The middle is just a sad, dense block of chocolate. It's dry and crumbly, and the warm, gooey center I was hoping for is nowhere to be found. Now, at this point, I'm sweating, I'm panicking, and I'm seriously starting to wonder if I should cancel the whole thing. But I can't. She's about to arrive, and I've already made a whole big deal about this dinner. I feel like I can't back out now, so I decide to throw together the meal as best as I can. When she finally arrives, I'm in full-on crisis mode. I greet her at the door with a big smile, trying to act calm, but she immediately notices the smoke smell lingering in the air. I tell her, don't mind the smoke, it's just, ambience. I'm not sure if she buys it, but I usher her to the table. The steak is terrible. The potatoes are lumpy. The cake is a sad, dry block of chocolate. I've done my best to salvage it, but there's no getting around the fact that this meal is a disaster. The whole evening feels like it's slipping away, and I just want to crawl under a rock. She takes a bite of the steak and, to my surprise, she says, "This is interesting." I cringe, but she smiles. She tells me it's okay, that she appreciates the effort, and that it's really sweet of me to have cooked for her. I'm relieved that she's not totally disgusted, but the rest of the evening continues to go downhill. The conversation feels awkward, and I can tell that she's trying to be polite, but it's clear that she's not impressed. We finish the meal in silence, and she eventually says, "I think I'm going to head out. Thanks for dinner, though, it was really, memorable." I walk her to the door, and as she leaves, she gives me a quick hug and says, "We should hang out sometime, just not for dinner." I watch her walk down the hall and immediately collapse onto the couch in despair. I had tried so hard to impress her, and instead, I managed to create one of the worst dinner dates in history. She was nice about it, but I knew the chances of me trying this again were slim to none. Lesson learned: never try to impress someone with your cooking skills unless you've actually mastered them. Or just order takeout. It's a lot easier. TLDR, tried to impress my crush with a homemade dinner. Burned the steak, ruined the potatoes, and messed up the lava cake. The dinner was a disaster, and I ended up embarrassing myself. TIFU by accidentally getting myself banned from my best friend's wedding. Let me set the stage. My best friend, let's call him Mike, was getting married to his fiancée, Lisa. They'd been together for 5 years, and I had been there through all the ups and downs. So, when he asked me to be his best man, I was honored. Of course, I said yes. I've known Mike since we were in kindergarten, and we shared so many memories. We'd spent countless nights debating random topics, playing video games, and just generally being there for each other. His wedding was going to be one of the biggest moments of both our lives. As best man, I had a lot of responsibilities, organizing the bachelor party, giving a speech, helping with wedding prep, and, of course, making sure everything went smoothly on the big day. I was prepared for all of it. At least, I thought I was. The wedding was set for a Saturday evening in a beautiful venue just outside the city. The whole thing was extravagant but classy, the kind of wedding where every detail was meticulously planned. Lisa had been dreaming about this day for years, and I had seen firsthand the level of stress she was under trying to make sure everything went according to plan. Mike, on the other hand, was the typical groom, nervous, but doing his best to stay calm. Here's where things started to go south. About a week before the wedding, Mike asked me if I could help him with some last-minute logistics. There was a minor problem with the seating chart. A few guests had canceled last minute, and we needed to shuffle people around. He asked if I could sit with Lisa's family because there was an odd number of seats. I didn't think much of it at the time. Sure, it was a bit awkward to be sitting with people I didn't know all that well, but I was happy to help. Fast forward to the day of the wedding. Everything was running smoothly. The ceremony was beautiful, and the reception was underway with people mingling, eating, and drinking. Mike had given me the speech earlier that day, and I had practiced it to the point where I could have delivered it in my sleep. But there was one thing that Mike had forgotten to mention to me. Lisa had a very, very particular rule when it came to the reception seating. Apparently, Lisa had carefully curated the seating chart for a reason. She'd made sure the tables were perfectly balanced between her side of the family and Mike's side. She didn't want anyone to feel out of place or left out. She had also made sure there were no weird groupings, ensuring that people who didn't get along were seated far apart. It was a big deal to her, and she took it very seriously. Now, here's where my mistake happened. After the ceremony, we moved into the reception hall. I walked in, scanned the room, and found my seat right at the table with Lisa's aunt, cousin, and a few people I had never met before. I sat down, trying to be polite and make small talk. I'm not exactly the most socially adept person, but I can hold my own. Then, out of nowhere, Lisa's sister, Kelly, approached me with a look on her face that can only be described as a mix of confusion and frustration. What are you doing here?" she asked. I was a little taken aback. "I'm sitting at this table," I said, motioning to the place setting in front of me. She didn't seem to believe me. "No, you're not supposed to be here. This is our table." I tried to explain that Mike had asked me to sit with Lisa's family, but Kelly wasn't having it. She told me that there was no way that was going to happen and that I needed to move. I was a little confused at first but decided to brush it off. I didn't want to cause any drama, so I politely stood up and began scanning the room for another seat. That's when I realized that the entire seating arrangement was in chaos. There were several people who hadn't arrived yet, and there was no easy way to swap places without causing a stir. I walked around, trying to figure out where I could sit, but every time I tried to sit at a table, someone would approach me and tell me I couldn't sit there either. At this point, I was starting to feel like a social pariah. I had no idea where I was supposed to be. It was incredibly awkward, and I started to get a little frustrated. That's when I saw Lisa. She was talking to a few guests near the entrance to the reception hall, and she looked incredibly stressed. I thought this was my chance to clarify everything, so I went over to her and asked if I could have a word. She immediately looked at me with wide eyes. "What are you doing here?" "This is my family's table." I felt like I was caught in some kind of social horror movie. "Mike asked me to sit here," I said, trying to be reasonable. Lisa's face changed from confused to outright angry. "Mike didn't tell you anything about the seating arrangement?" This table is for people who are part of my family. You should have been sitting with Mike's friends. Now, to be fair, I should have asked more questions. But honestly, it didn't seem that big of a deal at the time. It was a mistake, sure, but nothing to get that upset about. But Lisa was having none of it. She pulled me aside and told me that I had caused enough disruption for the evening and that I needed to leave. I was completely stunned. I apologized repeatedly, but the damage was done. She told me to go home, saying that my presence at the wedding was making things uncomfortable for everyone. At that point, I had no choice but to leave. Mike, of course, was not thrilled when I called him and explained what had happened. He tried to be understanding, but I could hear the disappointment in his voice. He told me that Lisa was really upset and that I needed to be more careful with how I handled things in the future. I spent the rest of the night sitting at home, feeling like the biggest idiot in the world. I had ruined one of the most important days of my best friend's life. And it wasn't just a minor screw-up, it was a full-on catastrophe. I tried texting Lisa to apologize again, but she didn't respond. It's been a week since the wedding, and I haven't spoken to Mike or Lisa in person. I know they're both hurt and angry, and honestly, I can't blame them. I've never felt so embarrassed and ashamed of myself in my life. I was trying to help, but I ended up making things worse. I'll never live this down. If I ever get the chance to make it up to Mike, I'll do whatever it takes. But for now, I'm just the guy who got banned from his best friend's wedding. I'm an idiot. I had always considered myself a pretty decent cook. Nothing too fancy, but I could make a solid meal. My friends and family were always impressed by my ability to throw together a meal without even needing a recipe. I had a few specialties: spaghetti with marinara sauce, a basic stir-fry, and of course, my infamous mac and cheese that had a cult following among my coworkers. But one evening, I decided to try something new, something a bit more ambitious. I was feeling adventurous and thought, why not make something fancy? Something complicated. Something that would really impress people. I had heard a lot about sous vide cooking lately, and I figured, why not try it? It sounded simple enough: just put the food in a vacuum-sealed bag, place it in a temperature-controlled water bath, and let it cook for hours. People said it made the meat tender and juicy, and the vegetables cooked to perfection. I had to try it. I had read some recipes online, watched a couple of YouTube videos, and felt ready to take the plunge. My local grocery store had everything I needed: a nice steak, a couple of chicken breasts, and some vegetables. I also picked up a vacuum sealer, which I thought would be a worthwhile investment since it seemed like a kitchen gadget that would make cooking fancy meals easier. I was ready to go. The process was simple enough at first. I vacuum sealed the steak and chicken breasts and set them aside. Then, I moved on to preparing the vegetables. I chopped up some carrots, potatoes, and asparagus, thinking I would get a full meal out of this. I was feeling pretty confident about the whole thing. I even had a glass of wine to celebrate my newfound culinary expertise. Here's where things started to go sideways. I had watched a video on how to use the sous vide machine, and it all seemed straightforward. I set the water bath to the recommended temperature for steak and chicken and dropped the vacuum-sealed bags into the water. But something didn't feel right. The bags weren't floating properly. They seemed like they were getting tangled in the water, or worse, sinking to the bottom. I double-checked everything. I thought I had sealed the bags correctly, but they just didn't seem right. I adjusted the bags, moved them around, and hoped for the best. I set a timer for the steak and chicken and went to watch TV in the living room, figuring it would be a couple of hours before I had to do anything else. Fast forward 2 hours, and I went back to check on my masterpiece. When I opened the kitchen door, the smell was off. The water bath smelled like burnt plastic. Not the kind of smell I was hoping for. I immediately rushed to the counter and pulled out the vacuum-sealed bags, horrified to see that the bags were disintegrating. The plastic had melted in the hot water, and what was supposed to be a sous vide dinner now looked like a science experiment gone wrong. The bags were clinging to the steak and chicken like some kind of sticky, gooey disaster. I tried to peel the plastic off, but it was a mess. The food had absorbed the smell of burnt plastic, and there was no way I could salvage it. At this point, I was feeling pretty defeated. I had spent hours prepping and cooking, and my grand dinner plans had just turned into an absolute disaster. But I wasn't ready to give up just yet. I decided that, despite everything, I was going to salvage what I could. The steak and chicken weren't completely ruined, I thought. They could still be cooked in a skillet, right? So, I heated up some oil in a pan and threw the steak and chicken on there to sear them. That's when things took another turn for the worse. I had no idea how to properly sear a steak. I had heard people talk about it before, but I had never really paid attention. I threw the steak on the pan and immediately realized I had made a mistake. The oil splattered everywhere. It hit me in the face, and before I could even blink, a small fire had started on the stove. I panicked and reached for the nearest thing I could find, a kitchen towel, to try and smother the flames. Unfortunately, I didn't realize that the towel had some oil stains on it from previous cooking mishaps. The fire spread to the towel, which only made things worse. Now, I had a full-on fire in the kitchen, food that was completely ruined, and a mess that looked like it belonged in a disaster movie. I grabbed the fire extinguisher, but I was so flustered that I didn't realize it was outdated and the pin wouldn't come out. My adrenaline was through the roof as I ran around trying to figure out what to do, and in my panic, I knocked over a bottle of red wine. The wine spilled all over the counter and then dripped onto the floor, adding to the chaos. I had somehow gone from trying to cook a nice dinner to dealing with a fire, ruined food, and a wine spill. I was on the verge of tears, but at this point, I realized I needed help. I called my best friend, who lived just down the street. When she showed up, she was horrified by the scene. The kitchen was covered in black soot from the fire extinguisher, the food was beyond saving, and I was standing there, covered in oil and wine, looking like a broken man. My friend didn't even say anything at first. She just stared at the mess. Then she started laughing. "What the hell happened here?" she asked, trying to catch her breath between chuckles. I just slumped onto the kitchen floor and told her everything. I tried to sous vide, it went wrong, I burned everything, and now I was just trying to salvage some dignity. We both just stood there, laughing at the sheer absurdity of it all. Eventually, we ordered takeout, and I spent the rest of the evening cleaning up the wreckage of my failed attempt at culinary greatness. It wasn't the fancy dinner I had envisioned, but at least I got a funny story out of it. And let's just say, I haven't touched the sous vide machine since. TIFU by trying to fix my friend's car and ending up with a destroyed engine and an angry mob of people at my door. A couple of months ago, my friend, let's call him Jake, came to me with a problem. His car, a 2008 Toyota Corolla, had been making a weird noise, something between a cough and a growl, but he couldn't figure out what it was. It had been slowly getting worse over the past week, and it seemed like something serious was about to happen. Jake's not the most mechanically inclined person, so when the car started acting up, he did what most of us would do, he panicked. And what's the first thing you do when you're unsure about car trouble? You Google it. After about 45 minutes of scanning the internet for potential problems, Jake decided that it was likely the alternator, or maybe the serpentine belt. He asked me if I could take a look at it. Now, I'm not exactly a professional mechanic, but I've done a few basic repairs on my own car before, oil changes, brake pads, that sort of thing. I figured it was no big deal and agreed to help him out. After all, it was a Corolla, so how hard could it be? I should have known better than to agree to take a look at it myself, but I felt like I had it in the bag. So we got started on it one Saturday afternoon. I brought over my toolkit and met Jake in his driveway. The plan was to check out the alternator and serpentine belt, just like we'd read about online, and maybe replace one of them if needed. We popped the hood, and I took a look around. The engine bay looked pretty standard, nothing too intimidating, but as soon as I started inspecting the belts and the alternator, I realized something: this wasn't just a simple problem. There were strange noises coming from the engine, and everything felt a little off. I had no idea what I was looking at, but I didn't want to admit that to Jake. I decided to go ahead and start trying to take the alternator off anyway. I spent the next hour trying to unbolt the thing, fumbling with the wrench and socket set as I swore under my breath. There was a lot of awkward twisting and turning, trying to reach bolts that were in impossible places, and I was just hoping I wouldn't make things worse. After an eternity of struggling, I finally got the alternator off and realized I had made a huge mistake. In the process of pulling the alternator, I'd knocked something loose. It wasn't just any part either, it was a crucial component of the engine, something that held the entire serpentine belt system in place. I had no idea what it was, but I knew I was in deep trouble. The engine was now missing a critical piece, and when I looked at Jake, I could tell he knew something was wrong. His face had gone pale, and I could hear the panic in his voice as he asked, "What did you do?" "Don't worry, I've got this. I'll figure it out," I said, trying to calm him down. But as I stared at the engine, I had no idea how to fix the problem. I tried looking online again for a solution, but nothing was helping. I decided to call in reinforcements. I reached out to my cousin, who works as a mechanic, and asked if he could help me out. He was about 30 minutes away, but I told him the situation was urgent. He said he'd come by once he finished his shift at the shop. While I waited for my cousin, I did what any desperate person would do. I tried to reassemble the car with whatever parts one could find lying around. I knew it was a terrible idea, but I was hoping I could just make it work and maybe get the car to the mechanic without any further damage. I attempted to put the serpentine belt back on, but in my panicked state, I didn't even know if it was going in the right direction. I managed to crank the engine for a few seconds to see if it would start, but it only sputtered before dying completely. At this point, Jake was beside himself. His phone was ringing constantly as he kept getting messages from his boss asking when he would be able to make it to work. His car was his only mode of transportation, and now it was dead in the driveway, thanks to me. Just as I thought things couldn't get any worse, my cousin showed up. He took one look at the engine and immediately started laughing. I felt like an idiot. After a few minutes of poking around, he told me that I had completely destroyed the engine's timing system by knocking that one part loose. He was nice enough to try and fix it, but it was clear that the damage was done. The car was now essentially a paperweight. Jake was furious, and I didn't blame him. He'd trusted me to help, and I had completely ruined it. I didn't have the money to pay for a new engine or even the labor costs to get it fixed. My cousin was able to recommend a good mechanic, but Jake was too upset to even talk to me. He didn't yell or scream, he just looked at me like I was a stranger and said, "You broke my car." Over the next week, things only got worse. Jake had to rely on public transport to get to work, and I could see how much it was affecting him. I offered to help with the repairs, but he refused. He didn't want me near his car ever again. To make matters even worse, word got out among our mutual friends that I had somehow managed to break the unbreakable Corolla. They started calling me Car Destroyer and teasing me whenever I came around. It felt like the whole world had turned against me. The repair bill ended up being more than Jake could afford, so he had to take out a loan to cover the cost. To make up for the mess I caused, I tried to pitch in where I could, but it never felt like enough. I paid for a few smaller repairs on his other car, but the sting of breaking his Corolla would haunt me for a long time. Eventually, Jake got his car back, fully repaired, but he never really forgave me. We're still friends, but I don't think things will ever be the same between us. Every time I see him, I can't help but remember the look on his face when he found out I'd broken his engine, and it feels like a reminder of just how badly I messed up. So yeah, TIFU by trying to fix my friend's car and ended up wrecking it beyond repair. Moral of the story: never attempt a car repair if you're not absolutely sure you know what you're doing. And always, always call a professional. I learned that the hard way. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new videos. Also, leave a comment, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your support and engagement mean a lot to me. See you in the next video.